Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Inshallah, today we'll be starting with a new chapter. And this is Kitab al-Buyu'. If you look at it, what we've taken so far was all ibadat in fiqh. Okay, so if you wanted to divide fiqh, okay, I'm just going to put a F here. If you had to say fiqh could be divided into two main branches. Okay, first branch is ibadah, all your acts of worship between you and Allah. Second is mu'amalat. Mu'amalat are your interactions with others. And under that comes marriage and divorce. Under that comes buying and selling of business. Under that comes qada when it comes to a judgment and ruling and the court system, etc. Under it comes inheritance and the like. So the first half we've taken, and we've took Kitab al-Tahara, Salah, Zakah, fasting, and Hajj. So inshallah we'll be starting off today with Kitab al-Buyu'. This is one of the most important topics after your ibadat, obviously, in order that a Muslim needs to know about. If you look at your day-to-day life, every day you're transacting more than once in the day. For example, if you're buying your groceries, that's to do with Kitab al-Buyu'. If you need to buy a subscription online, internet, whatever it may be, if you're teaching somebody and they're paying you for it, if you're doing a job, you're being employed by somebody, all that comes under Kitab al-Buyu'. If you hold a card, for example, you need to tap your card here to pay. All that is masail involved. Means linguistically to exchange one thing for another or to exchange something. And in the Sharia, it's when there is a change of wealth for other wealth with taradi. Taradi means with agreement. So for example, let me put this here for you. And there's more than one definition, but this is an easier definition. Why do people buy and sell? Because you feel that you are in need of the thing that this person has, either the product or the service. And they have the product or the service, but they're in need of the money. So there is an exchange between two parties. Okay, that's bay'. On condition that this exchange happens with taradi. Both parties are happy with it. So I give you an example. If somebody is forced or held, for example, let's say you got a thief who, we all know stealing is haram, but let's say he tried to make his stealing halal by saying, you know what, he sold it to me. So let's say, for example, you got a phone and it's worth, let's say, $100. And this person, when they want to steal, they say, you know what, they force you to sell it to me. Or let's say they're not stealing, but there's force and the other party is not happy. So they say, sell it to me for $10, $20. As long as there's no agreement from both parties, then this transaction does not go through. It's null or void according to Islam. There's only one or two conditions where a person may be forced to sell assets. And that's, for example, let's say somebody goes bankrupt, okay, and they're owing a lot of people money. Here, after it goes to the courts, the judge can look at this person's assets and then they can forcefully sell them off. So he can't say, for example, that, oh, you're selling my house and my car and all my properties, and I'm not happy with it, so this is not counted. We'll say, no, here you owe others money, and the law, through the jurisdiction, they've been able to sell your possessions in order to pay those who you owe money. So that's when it comes to the definition, simple definition. Thereafter, the word majlis, I just want to define that for you before going to the masail, because as I look through the masail, there's a few definitions that you guys need to know before getting into them. The word majlis literally means a sitting. Okay, that's why if you look at those, you know, the sofas that are on the floor, well, the cushioning, and they call it majlis Arabi. When you go to the Arabian countries, they usually sit on the floor in the lounge and they call that a majlis, i.e., it's a gathering. Why do they mention this? Because if you're transacting with somebody, okay, and you're in the same gathering, there's certain rules which apply. And once that gathering is over, there's certain rules which apply also. So there's ahkam, rulings related to both. Okay. Also, when it comes to buying online, for example, let's say you chatting on WhatsApp or you buying on a call. Here, we'll say that as long as you're on the call and it hasn't ended, you are still in the gathering or still in the majlis. Why do I mention this? Because the masail related to it will come. Right. Number 3. How does a transaction begin? How does a transaction start? What are the conditions for this transaction to be correct Islamically? First, we mentioned is there must be taradi. Taradi means both parties are happy. And I think here we understand this. Number 2 is there must be something called ijab. Okay? Ijab, alif, ya, jim, alif, and ba. Ijab, we could translate in our terms to mean the initiation of the transaction from one party. Okay? And then there's going to be qabul. Qabul is the acceptance from the other party. And this is also when it comes to marriage, there's got to be ijab and qabul. Got to be someone who initiates and then somebody who accepts. So, for example, if you're sitting in a gathering, I'll give you an example of marriage, then we'll get back to business. If they're sitting in a gathering and a father says, I've given my daughter to you in marriage, and the other, what this is called ijab. He's initiated, okay, the conversation. If this person hasn't accepted, then there's no ruling built on it. Nothing goes further. The minute they accept, that's when we say, as long as the other conditions are fulfilled, the nikah is correct. So similarly, when it comes to business, and it might sound a little basic, right? You temporary masail built upon this, you'll understand why we're going into detail. When it comes to business, it's similar in the sense that a person begins the transaction. Okay. So they say, for example, I will sell you my car. And this has to be in the majlis. This majlis we spoke about in the gathering. Okay. So let's say two parties are sitting in a room and it says, I'm selling you my car. There's a few things that can happen. First is this person accepts immediately with the price. Okay. So he says, I've sold you my car and he's named the price, let's say $50,000. And the person says, I've accepted. And here, this transaction, we could say has gone through. It's correct. Saeed, can you hear me?
Yes, sure.
Okay. Number 2 is the person who's selling, they start off and they say, I'm selling you my car, okay, for $50,000. This person doesn't accept, or he remains quiet, okay? He remains quiet. If he doesn't accept or he exits the majlis, he exits the gathering, okay? Let's say he's exited the gathering. Here, the transaction doesn't go through, okay? Now, if he had to come back, so let's say you're in a room and this guy says, you know what, I've sold you my car for 50,000. Say Saeed tells me, I've sold you my car for 50,000. I don't say anything. I walk out of his house and then I come back 2 minutes later and I say, you know what, I've bought it. Here we'll say that your qabul, the acceptance that I gave was too late. It wasn't in the same gathering. So we ask him again. Why do they mention this? Is because sometimes when it comes to the gathering, the minute you leave it, as long as the transaction was not completed, you can't come back to it until you start afresh or you start from the beginning. And this is to protect the rights of each other or to protect the rights of one another. That's ijab and qabul. Then they start to mention you. They mention a few other masail based upon this. What happens if there's no verbal agreement? What if somebody writes to somebody else to say, I've sold you my house, or I'm selling you my house for 50,000. The minute the letter reaches this person, we'll count that to be the gathering or the majlis. Okay. And if he agrees to it, the transaction goes through. If he doesn't agree with it, there's nothing built upon it. Similarly, if you're on the phone, okay, so you're speaking on the phone to somebody today. Say I speak to Alam Gheer, and I tell him, Alam Gheer, I'm selling my car for 10,000. Okay. Right now, whilst we're on this call, we'll count it as the majlis or the gathering. Alam Gheer doesn't give me an answer. He phones me 2 days later and he says, I've bought the car from you. I've now accepted. Here we'll say, no, you were too late. If you want to accept it, you have to see if I'm still willing to sell. What happens if it occurs the opposite way around, where somebody says, sell me this? Okay, so the buyer, he's the one who begins. Instead of somebody initiating to say, buy this from me, he's saying, you know what, sell it to me, sell me your phone. And if that, for example, $1,000, if that person agrees, even though it's the opposite way around, it's still counted. Also, if there's no conversation between the two, however, from their body language and their actions, you can see that they have no issue, then here we'll say the transaction is also correct. And I give you an example. When you go to the supermarkets, obviously those from the first world, it's a little bit different. When I was living in Saudi, I remember when you would go to the smaller supermarkets, not those that have receipts and that, you would just pick whatever you want as long as you knew the total. You would walk, as you're walking out, you would just leave the money on the table and walk out. Here, Islamically, you learnt about initiating the conversation and that guy accepting. Here, we'll say that it happened with action, not with word. So I came, I showed him the products that I took from his shop. He saw them, I gave him the money. There was no verbal exchange, and I walked out. As long as he's happy, I'm happy. I haven't cheated him. It's correct, inshallah. Okay. Then there's another definition I want to give you, which is called al-khiyar. Al-khiyar, you could translate. I don't really like to use the word option, because option in trading means something else, but we'll say here you have you allowed to go back on the transaction. Okay, there's khiyar, and it can be for a few different reasons. We're going to go into this in detail, and between a few of the madhahib, some agree that they agree that there's certain khiyarat agreed upon by everybody, and there's those which are differed upon. It's called a khiyar. Okay. Thereafter, if these people agree, okay, let's say there was ijab and qabul. Let's say, here's my phone, I sold it for 1,000, and you accepted from me in the majlis, in the gathering. You haven't yet paid the money, but the deal is done. Are you allowed to now go back on the deal? Okay? Are you allowed to go back on the deal or not? Here there's two opinions. Or before getting into the two opinions, if let's say there's anything wrong with the phone later on, it will come in the next few lessons. You've got khiyarul aib, you've got an option because of the defect in the product to return it, or if you never know the product, see the product, etc., you still have an option. Then here there's something called khiyarul majlis. Okay, when you're in the gathering, the fact that you're in that gathering, you've been given a right. Okay, what's the right, or what's the right that both of you have? You can go back on the transaction. It's called khiyarul majlis. The Messenger says in a hadith, البيعان بالخيار ما لم يتفرقا. The buyer and the seller, they are بالخيار, they both have an option. What's the option? To go back on the deal that they just agreed on, as long as they still in the same gathering. Now, the scholars have two opinions here. The Hanafi madhab are of the opinion that if there was ijab and qabul, The guy initiated and that guy now accepted. You cannot go back on the deal for no reason. So I'll give you an example how this happens. How it happens is, for example, let's say I sold my phone to Alam Gheer, and then whilst we're sitting, about 5 minutes later, I remember that, you know what, how am I going to teach the students and how am I going to do this, and this? So I say, you know what, I've cancelled the transaction. I don't want to do it anymore. According to the Hanafi madhab, that's not allowed because you agreed with the brother or the sister or the other party and you've gone through with the transaction. The other madhahib, like the Shafi'i madhab, they say that as long as you in the majlis, as long as you in the gathering, you can go back on that transaction. So let's say we're still sitting in the same room. I sold my phone to him. He gave me my $1,000. And 5 minutes later, either him or me, whichever one, if we want to go back on the transaction. So I remember that I need my phone for X, Y, and Z. Or he thinks that, you know what, I paid $1,000, but it might be a bit much. I remember if I go to town, there's a special going on. So he says, you know what, give me back my 1,000, I'll give you back the phone. According to the other madhahib, as long as he's still in the majlis, as long as he's still in the gathering, then he's allowed to do that. Also, you must differentiate between negotiation and the actual deal. So negotiation is where there's back and forth, but there's no agreement that's been reached yet. As long as you're negotiating, then there's nothing which is binding. But the minute you agree, as long as you're in the same majlis, according to the Hanafi madhab, you can't go back now, unless there's a defect or unless this man here now gives up his right. According to the other madhahib, the Shafi'i madhab, Hanbali madhab also have an opinion that if you are both in the same gathering, you can go back on that transaction. And that would mean, for example, if you wanted, according to them, if you wanted to put it practically, let's say you go to a shop and you get to the cashier. Let's say you went to buy some clothing. You get to the cashier, you pay. And then now, as you're exiting the shop, you haven't yet left. Then you realize that, you know what, I don't want these clothes anymore. So you go back and say, I want to cancel, I want to annul this deal between us. According to these people, you would be within your right. Why do a lot of these masail don't come to the normal man? Because you'll find that in secular law also, they benefited from our fiqh, and they've also modernized it and developed it such that it's very advanced. So you don't think of these rights, you don't really think of being cheated because it's all there set in stone and set by the law. And it's people have been transacting from the beginning of time. Okay. Thereafter, another mas'ala built on this previous mas'ala. Okay. Let's say when the initiation occurred for the deal, so I say, for example, I am selling you my piece of land, which is 100 square meters, okay, for $1 million. 100 square meters for $1 million. You only have the option to reject the deal altogether or to agree with the whole deal. You are not allowed, or it's not within your jurisdiction to agree to part of the deal. So, for example, if I tell you that I'm selling you my 100 square meters for $1 million, and you say, I've bought the 50 square meters for $500,000. Here, it's not allowed unless I permit it. Why do they say that? Because the one who initiated, he wanted the full product to be sold or the full thing to be sold. As for the one accepting, he's only accepting half. That was not how the deal initiated. So you've got to negotiate and you've got to agree. You must remember in the Sharia, once something, they mention all this because once something becomes binding, you can only leave with a legitimate excuse from the deal or from the transaction. Thereafter, once this ijab and qabul has occurred, as we said, then the transaction goes through. Number 6, when you're selling things, okay, when you're buying and selling, have this classification with you because it's going to help you when it comes to interest, okay? Whatever you're buying or selling is either you're using, I'll put here money, but in our terms that includes, Shari'i terms, it includes gold, silver, paper money, card, etc. You're using this money to either buy more money or more wealth, okay? So for example, if you're exchanging money, let's say dollars to pounds, here, what are you doing? You're using money to money, okay? Or you're going to be buying some goods, an actual item, okay? Physical goods, let's put here item. So you're using the money to buy some goods, an actual item that you can touch, tangible. Or you're using the money to pay for a service. Now it's going to come later when we're speaking about interest, two types of interest. When it comes to money for money, let's say it's different currency, or let's say gold for silver, you're not allowed to delay. Okay, it must be hand to hand. Money for money, it must be hand to hand. Money for an item, okay, here you're allowed to delay. Okay, and so here I'll put an X. Just remember this. If you make a note, you'll understand why I'm giving it to you now. And then you've got money for a service, and here you're also allowed to delay. But there's a condition, or there's a few conditions which fit all these three. Okay, all these three. Can you see here? One of the main conditions is al-ilm, knowledge, or something must be ma'loom. It must be known what exactly you're transacting with. Okay, so is it $100 for 80 pounds? Or is it $100 to buy one house or two houses, whatever it is? It must be known. This man must know what exactly he's buying. Or it's a service. I'm paying you for something. What exactly am I paying you for? So the general rule is you have to know what you're buying. Then, after mentioning the general rule, they give you certain exceptions to the rule. Okay? And one of them being, if you were buying and selling after they told you that money for money must always be known and mustn't be delayed, if you're using money to buy some grain or some wheat, here you can buy it and it's weighed, so you know. In those days they used to use a scale form of measurement. Or even if they don't weigh it, it's okay. Why? Because you can see what you're buying. So it doesn't have to be measured. The correct word is measured. Okay. So you know what it is, but it doesn't have to be measured. Whereas here you'll know what it is. And if it's gold, for example, it will have to be measured. So 1 kg for 1 kg, like that. But here, if you're buying wheat, you can either weigh it, and even if they're not weighing it, they just selling, like let's say they take a cup or a bucket or something, and they pour for you. Whatever they poured for you may be slightly different to what they poured for me, etc. But that is okay as long as they haven't stipulated it. And then thereafter, there's other masail, but inshallah, we'll stop here for today. Just what I want you to get at is, what I want you to understand, definition, then these three conditions for now. Both parties must be happy. There must be an initiation and there must be acceptance. And then we spoke about khiyar. And we also spoke about masail which were built on it. I don't think I left anything out for today. And then this chapter, once you know the beginning, it goes deeper and deeper and deeper.